Right, and welcome to this edition of Freightonomics. Freightonomics, the podcast where we discuss both freight and the macroeconomic environment and how the two work together and how we can gain insights from both. And with me, as always, is Anthony Smith, lead economist, among other things. He's going to be monitoring LinkedIn and other social media outlets to make sure that all our comments are received and addressed in a timely fashion. As well as give us some of that fresh macroeconomic insight. And later on the show today, Anthony, I'm really excited about our show today.
Yeah. And I think this is really going to be a big one because I always say, as you just mentioned, I'm going to be checking the social media platforms. I'm going to be on LinkedIn, Facebook, all that good stuff. But I think this is going to be a show where we're really going to have a lot of good conversation just because of the topic.
Yeah. We're gonna talk to PowerFleet CEO Chris Wolfe about the distribution of the Holy Grail. And by the Holy Grail, I mean the vaccine for this never-ending virus that has spread throughout the globe, and how, of course, that is going to change our world. I guess they've projected that here in the next week, even, they may have that approval for the vaccine. One of the big questions, of course, is how they're going to get it to everybody that needs it. The channels that it goes through. It's not just as simple as just flipping a switch and saying, here's the vaccine, everyone has it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of logistics involved. There's been a lot of questions around how much that is going to impact the supply chains right now, distribution channels, transportation, obviously, and all that, in what has been an historic a historically tight freight market, domestic transportation, of course, still struggling to keep up with all that demand. And now we have this virus on top of it, or the vaccine on top of it, that, could have some pretty significant impacts downstream.
Definitely. And I think when we're looking at this, there's so many stories around this, right? I mean, there's a camp of people like, hey, I'm not touching this thing. I want to see how it and then some people are like, hey, maybe middle ground. I'm okay with taking this vaccine. Just maybe I want to make sure that it's safe. Let me give it a couple of months or whatever. And some that are just like, hey, I want it as soon as possible. But what do you think? Question out of nowhere. What do you think about the potential proposal of there being some kind of economic incentive or a stimulus package behind the virus or the vaccine?
It's a little oogie to me. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if I really like you should be incentivized at this point to, your doctor should have some advice for you there as well. Medical professionals, have we gotten to the point where it's the price is right for every kind of thing that we do? I don't know how I feel about the government I almost feel more nervous about taking something that the government's like, here, I'll give you a lollipop if you take it. Like that. That doesn't feel right to me.
Right. And I mean, I had a chance to talk with Zach Rogers, who we're going to have at some point here on the show, not today, but in the near future. But one of the things that came up in conversation was, I mean, it's almost like a barrier behind aid. And although the vaccine is for, good use and all that other stuff, help protect your body and all that good stuff, but some people are going to have bad reactions or adverse reactions, or some people can't even take these vaccines because of certain allergies. And so is there going to be some kind of way to, combat that? We have Rhonda right now in the comments saying that she's waiting for sure, but that's just her choice, thankfully, and no way in favor of incentives for taking. And I think that's also going to feed into a lot of those theories of, hey, there's something in this virus. They're going to be tracking us with this virus.
Nobody trusts the government anyway. And
this is going to make it even worse a little bit.
And everybody wonders. I was listening to Dan Lebitard on ESPN radio one day, and he was like, why is it, and this surprised me from a media person, why is it that we as a country, as a society, don't trust expertise, or we devalue expertise? And I'm like, well, listen to the leaders that talk about each other. We've learned it from you, Dad.
Yeah.
We learned it by listening to you, because you each give us reasons not to listen to one side or the other, and some of those are valid. We can't tell anymore. In the age of information, it's almost like you're really almost you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
Because we've got so much information available to us nowadays, and we don't know what's real and what's not. Now, of course, everything on Freightonomics, 100% certified.
100% facts.
we don't dabble in the gossip and the hearsay.
Except for maybe consumer confidence and
Oh.
consumer sentiment. I mean, it's not exists some
See?
of the factual reportings, but is it really like fact-based, hard numbers?
Oh man, hey, how are you feeling today, Anthony?
About an 8.
Okay.
8.5.
Super. Yeah, that's super concrete, and I
9.
can build off that.
Better as we go.
But before we get into all the COVID supply chain and all that kind of stuff, because I want to get to a few of these stories because I find it very topical and interesting this year to talk about Christmas tree distribution. So Linda Baker actually lives in Portland, very close to where one of the main areas for Christmas tree, the Christmas tree supply for the United States is. Wrote the story, Oh, COVID Christmas Tree. Basically saying that Christmas tree volumes or demand has been elevated year over year. The two main distribution areas for Christmas trees, growing areas, in the United States. Do you know what those are?
What are they?
Give me one guess.
The two
main growing areas for Christmas trees in the United States.
in the United States, I'm going to say
If you were a freight broker, you'd know immediately.
the Northeast.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Oregon
Okay.
and North Carolina.
Okay.
So Christmas tree season, affectionately called up in the Northwest, is the one time of year where carriers don't mind going into the
there.
Pacific Northwest because they can haul a ton of Christmas trees. And, it says in the article that they are seeing about 10% more demand this year versus last year. Of course, they're getting more money for it if you're hauling this stuff than they were year over year because, capacity's already tight. They're seeing about $200 more per load this year than last year hauling to California, $500 more per load when they're hauling to Texas from the Pacific Northwest. So it is a lucrative job hauling these seasonal items. They're expecting the season to be more acute, so basically a lot stronger for a shorter period of time because everybody's sitting in their house getting Christmas trees.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of individuals, like you said, just sheltering at place. And typically, I know the other thing that we usually see when we kind of get into this time of the year, colder weather, people sit at home even more so, and they start kind of furniture shopping.
Yes.
They just kind of, hey, we've had this couch for an entire year.
I guess the big question will be how much of that have they already done this year because they've been in their house for so long.
Right.
So I'm intrigued to see just how, all that kind of plays out. Housing demand is still pretty epic, is it not?
It is. It's still going strong. A lot of demand, of course, as always, historical low interest rates. I don't know if that's ever not going to be a thing for the next few months. Of course, we're going to have some slowing down as we get into the colder months in many regions throughout the United States. But the fact remains, tale of two consumers, those that have been able to retain employment and, their life hasn't changed, but because they're just working remotely, are still very much active in buying a home, especially entry-level homes or those in the suburbs to kind of get out of those metropolitan areas. California, of course, having an exodus of sorts, many in the New York City area, getting out into more of the suburbs, or maybe just getting out altogether to a whole new state. So
We need to do a show on the fallout of 2020 because we had this reaction to going indoors and sheltering at home, having everybody come back, go work at home. There's going to be another adjustment period once this vaccine gets distributed and everybody starts living their lives, and it's not going to be the way it was before.
Right.
So I think we need to do a show on what that's going to look like. In the meantime, we just had our holiday season kickoff with Black Friday, traditional.
Yep.
I didn't know if it was going to be as booming because everybody's been, like I said, purchasing at home already. Well, according to real estate company CBRE and Otoro, they are expecting a 73% increase over the 5-year average for e-commerce sales during the holiday season.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And it's just one of those areas that you really can't overestimate or over forecast and say like, that it hasn't met demand
insane.
expectations. And so I think this is going to be an area that's always going to outperform expectations. Of course, we're looking at just any kinds of forecast for retail sales and e-commerce. And I think, as you mentioned, the new normal for many individuals is going to be kind of revolving around that e-commerce lifestyle. And one of the things that we saw, of course, in the most recent employment report for job openings is that warehousing and employment opportunities really were one of the main growers when we look at month-to-month activity for any type of employment opportunities.
Yeah, it's the workplace is going to be different. The employment levels are going to be different. All sorts of stuff's going to be different there as we get back to, I don't know if you call it normalcy or new normal or whatever your buzzword is. It's something. But Greg Miller writes that the container import boom likely to last into March or longer. Talked to Greg Miller yesterday on the midday market update about this in general, basically saying that capacity is booked. Not just to Chinese New Year, but beyond Chinese New Year. So if you're trying to pull freight into this country, you're too late.
Right.
If you're trying to get it here before March, you're too late. There's no room on these ships. These vessels are already at capacity. Rates are capped right around $4,000 per 40 foot coming from on the Trans-Pacific side. They basically put a cap on that. There's also an article on FreightWaves.com about that as well. Written by Greg Miller himself. Just covers all things maritime. So yeah, there's still a lot. We've still got a long tail to what's occurring right here. But in the meantime, we've got this vaccine.
Yeah, we do.
And we're bringing on Chris Wolfe to ask a few questions because I personally, Anthony, have had a ton of questions about what this distribution looks like. How is it going to impact freight in the United States? What does it look like? The supply chain? How do they package this thing? How do they move it, et cetera? So let's bring on Chris Wolfe, PowerFleet CEO. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Zach. Hi, Anthony. How you guys doing?
Doing great. So, Chris, go ahead. I know you've been on the show before, but give everybody a little bit of background on PowerFleet and yourself before we get started.
Yeah, PowerFleet, we're a telemetry provider of everything from bumper to cargo. So you think about whether you're in cab, refrigerated, two-way command and control, your container, your chassis, your dry van trailer, or the freight itself, getting to the topic at hand. We actually have a telemetry mobility platform that can actually help you track, monitor, and manage, and actually improve your safety of your operation at the same time. My background, many of your viewers probably know who I am, but it's like I used to run OmniTrax back in the heyday, which was a long time ago. And prior to that, I was an enterprise class software engineer for Roadway Express and as well as for Leaseway Transportation. So actually coming out of the industry, building order shipment tracking systems and operational control systems.
All things data and transportation. You speak my language. Hence, I love having you on this show. So let's get things kicked off here. What does, this supply chain look like for the vaccine? It's got a few origin points across the globe. Number of those, some of them are in Belgium, some are in China. How does the vaccine get from origin to the final destination?
Predominantly, most of the pharmaceutical companies use third-party logistics providers to handle all of their logistics outbound. So that being said, they're all working right now on those plans and then on the capacity within the various modes. So you already mentioned the container ships being totally booked. Much of this freight, I'd probably say almost all this freight dealing with the virus is going to move by plane. And it's also going to be specially chartered aircraft because of the timeliness and the requirements around it. Everyone knows the Pfizer vaccine. We are actually involved in vaccine transport already. We helped the French Red Cross. I don't know if you saw the announcement earlier this summer, moving Ebola as well as COVID testing equipment and supplies, which require temperature monitoring, all the way into the Congo and back out of France. And we do that right now in Israel, moving medical supplies and vaccines, et cetera. So I think if you're talking about the Pfizer vaccine, it's a negative 80 degrees Celsius. It's a very, that is very specialized equipment, specialized containers, a very tricky, to get it from point A to B. You have to really watch how many touch points you have, how many transit stops you have where the freight is actually changing hands. And then, because again, it's very time sensitive at that temperature. And then obviously the Moderna vaccine, which is coming out right now, is negative 20. That actually is in the sweet spot of most monitoring devices. Our monitoring devices, can actually handle that very well. And then the AstraZeneca is actually less temperature sensitive than those two. So again, the less temperature sensitive the vaccine is, obviously the more logistics opportunities you have, the more options you have.
So, what do you think the impact is going to be to the domestic transportation environment? That negative 80 degrees Celsius doesn't necessarily lend itself too great to a reefer trailer. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely not. We do have two-way command and control reefer, but I have, by the way, I would never say we could get down to negative 80. I think you'd probably, just freeze our device and, it'd crack in half. They actually have built specialized containers for that. So, and the container itself has monitoring capability. So again, and that was Carrier that announced that. So, hats off to Carrier for being very quick at that. The question is whether or not they actually have the capacity to ramp up. And everyone needs to keep in mind too, this is like the proverbial pig in the python, right? We already have a very good distribution network for the flu vaccine. And by the way, for every vaccine, you can go get a vaccine at the CVS or your local pharmacy. So the supply chain already exists. It's really handling the surge and the specialty around specifically the Pfizer vaccine. And once that pig through the python's done, then I think everything will go into what's called, like the normal state of affairs for distribution. But we definitely have that big surge and coming at us right now in the next year.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting. I like your analogy, pig and the python. That makes a lot of sense. So, when you're talking about, this vaccine coming over on a plane, then it has to get transferred. So there's touch points involved there. What are some of the potential shortfalls or problems with that, handoff, especially as you're talking about, we only have 20% availability on airlines right now, so some of that infrastructure is not available. Do you think that there's other areas of the that distribution channel that aren't necessarily all the way there either?
Well, I think on the the air capacity, obviously there's going to be chartered air capacity. There's actually military capability that military airlift command. We actually have a lot of airlift capacity to bring this or anything into the United States or anywhere for that matter. I think if once it gets here, the problem, kind of the benefit of having a negative 80-degree product is like you're going to have a very specialized supply chain with very few touch points. And they've already engineered and figured that out for the Pfizer vaccine. It's the other vaccines which actually can use multiple modes, or we're going to have more touch points. So again, that's where our refrigerated monitoring capability, and by the way, the ability to set and change the temperature within a refrigerated unit is very critical while it's in transit. It's one thing to monitor; it's another thing to actually be able to make an adjustment before things go south. And so what we believe, like with the Moderna vaccine and the other ones, they're going to require real-time monitoring. There's going to be a lot more touch points, a lot more transit points, and every one of those is a temperature incursion event. So, obviously, if you're transferring it in Ohio and it's already minus 20, that's fine. But if you're transferring it in Florida, where I'm at right now, you're definitely going to want to watch those touch points and make sure that when you back the trailer up, you seal it. It gets into thermostatically controlled environments along the way. So again, that's going to be very critical for the Moderna and for the AstraZeneca vaccine.
So, Chris, one of the things you touched on is there's so many touch points. It's a large operation. Very curious on what is the specific role in working hand in hand, because there's a lot that can go wrong here. So, for example, what's the role for the public sector? What's the role for the private sector?
And when you say the public sector, if you're speaking of government, one of the things I think that is missing is, I mentioned this in the pre-show a little bit, is the FEMA. We need an overarching logistical control center. And typically FEMA would do that in an emergency situation. I mean, they do that in hurricanes all the time. They pre-position, and they have a good logistics capability, right? They pre-position things in the event of a hurricane, and they take it back later. So again, they do have surge capability. They actually have logistics, command and control capability that they should bring to bear. That being said, I mean, hats off to our commercial carriers and the 3PLs that we have here in the States and around the world. Like, you can name them off the top of your head. They're phenomenal at doing large scale, logistics efforts like this. as well as our U.S. military. So we definitely have the capability. It's all bringing it to bear in the time frame that we have, and that's where it's really going to be you just mentioned, a commercial and a public partnership has to be formed here and formed fairly quickly. I think for the first shipments, as they start getting things going, and that could probably be handled by the 3PLs themselves. But when you start talking, trying to vaccinate, 330 or 340 million Americans, it's going to take a little bit more coordination.
Yeah, so, we always talk about this in trucking where, you technically own the freight that you're transporting. Right. Who controls all this in the big picture? I mean, we're talking about how the public sector is kind of, sort of involved, but then you have the private sector potentially getting its hands in there somewhere. Who owns the channels, or who decides where this vaccine goes and gets distributed to? Who's responsible for footing the bill for all these transportation costs?
Very good questions. I think some of that is actually in flux right now because, again, we're in the middle of a change of administrations. You have, new people being put in charge of all the various agencies. A lot of different agencies are involved, all the way from, you think about it, it's the Food and Drug Administration to the CDC to, Health and Human Services. The government needs to, and when I say the government, this is federal and state, but primarily federal has to make the call on, what's the triaging, initially. So who gets it? Where what states get it? How much do they get? And I think they've got the guidelines down, like get it to the first responders, get it to the healthcare workers, get it to the elderly. And again, then demographics will drive, where the numbers are. And I think given the 3PLs that the pharmaceuticals are working with, the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, they definitely have the capability to do the initial shipments and get it for those players, the initial people that need treated. It's the bigger mass vaccines, which are going to have to be distributed primarily like I mentioned before, like the pharmacy. I want to go to CVS and get my shot. I don't want to, have to, go down to like what you did for testing here. You had to go down to the Raymond James Stadium to get your nose swab. You can't do that in a mass. So we're going to have to get it at the CVS or at the Walgreens.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's eventually going to become, this new normal after we get this initial surge, but it's going to take a while for us to get there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Don't you think? It just came out that the states are going to be in charge, along the same lines of what we were just talking about. The states, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but the states are supposedly going to control who gets the vaccine first within each area. What are your thoughts on that versus the national big picture?
It's a nightmare. I mean, it's just literally a nightmare waiting to happen because, if you're a logistics provider and you're trying to say, okay, I have to, first of all, if you're back all the way up to the shipper, right? It's like they have to be able to pack it for the final destination, right? So that, you have to have the bill of lading on there and the freight bill and the air bill and whatever has to be able to say where it's going. So those decisions have to be made pretty quickly. Now, again, where it's going could be a centralized or a regionalized distribution center, but which one, right? Those decisions still have to be made. And is that going to be the state decided where that is and who it is? And getting back to the other question, the other part of your first question was like who pays for it? And again, I think all of that is going to be funded primarily through the government funding, which we hope some of that gets approved here as Congress before they recess for the holidays. I think it was already stated in the news, or just today. It's like if that doesn't get approved, then the first shipments have already been approved. They're under, there's enough money for that, but the follow-on shipments, the money for that has not been approved, and that money will actually flow back to the pharmaceutical companies to help them pay their transportation costs, and the transportation costs won't be known until we know where the freight's going and how it's going, right? So it's just this chicken and egg thing that could really be fixed if the federal government itself would step up. And as I mentioned before, some organization like FEMA or even the Military Logistics Command, has the capability to do this at a grand scale.
Yeah, I saw where Canada actually ordered 4 times the amount of their population that needed to inoculate their population. That was pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, and Chris, real quick, as you know, we're streaming live on LinkedIn, and we have Luke Chalmers here with a quick question. Knowing that you are, PowerFleet is an industry leader, one of the questions here we have is just understanding, and if you can break down some of PowerFleet's value add during this crazy time in the pandemic and the distribution, and especially knowing that a lot of pharma carriers are going to have their own platforms, and maybe there's a lack of mapped and validated temperature control trailers throughout this whole process.
Yeah, I think our value is, again, I say this, it's kind of funny. It's like the one throat to choke. There's a lot of carriers out there that are not the mega carriers who can pick and choose their technology in every product that they have. If you want one supplier who can provide you not just one product, we have a family of products for different budgets, for different use cases. So, a chassis is different than a container is different than a dry van. And by the way you use those can be differently. So you might need a different product at a different price point that can do something different. That all being said, our products were all engineered from the ground up, and I think very specifically sets us apart from our competition. With my background, the goal was, hey, the freight ultimately will track itself. We actually move $15 trillion, dollars worth of goods in the United States every year, and all that freight with the right technology at the right price will track itself. So the carriers ultimately have to track the assets, and the shipper and the consignee can track the freight themselves. If you believe that, then our platforms, getting back to like the pharmaceutical and the specific problem that we that we're trying to solve now, is what's the right solution for what you're trying to do. We have a palletized temperature monitoring system. It's very inexpensive. It's less than $20 a pallet. Sure, there's a mother device that goes with that to consolidate the 26 pallets in a 53-foot trailer. So again, it's like that's the right solution for pallet or even container level tracking within the trailer. We also have the refrigerated two-way command and control. So that way we can actually not only monitor the carrier or Thermo King unit, but we can actually change the temperature if we notice that there was a temperature incursion. By the way, we can preemptively change it if we know you're going to be, example, Phoenix, opening the doors on a runway when it's 120 degrees. So you might want to pre-cool the trailer down before it actually gets to the transit point. So that way you actually minimize the incursion when it happens. I mean, those are just some examples. But what we try and do is getting back to the question, actually the point of, they have their own platforms. That's fine. We integrate with anybody. But maybe our mobility platform is the right solution for the specific problem they have. And, customers have picked us. The French Red Cross picked us specifically to help them get COVID and Ebola medicines as well as testing equipment into the Congo, and we were phenomenally successful doing that.
Yeah, technology can be a huge add-on there. There's always room to grow there. And Chris, we are running up on time. How can people get in touch with PowerFleet if they're interested in learning more about what you guys are doing?
Oh, I'd love to have them come visit our website, powerfleet.com. You can always email me, cwolfe@powerfleet.com. That's Wolfe with an E.
Wolfie. All right. Thank you so much, Chris, and have a happy holidays and stay safe out there.
Yeah, you too. Stay healthy, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So, a lot. There's so much there.
Yeah.
So much there. We could have gone on for an hour, more hours and hours, but we don't have time to do that this week. But Anthony, it is about that time for Secret Santa or White Elephant. If you're into that kind of stuff, which one would you prefer?
Secret Santa.
That's wrong.
Clearly.
That's a wrong answer.
Clearly.
You're going to get some level of It's White Elephant.
No.
White Elephant or Dirty Santa, as I like to call it.
I never even heard of that. You just make that up?
No, that's exactly what it's called.
I'm not Googling that. I'm scared of what's going to come up here.
Your job with Dirty Santa is to get the most entertaining gift possible.
I'm not Googling. I'm not searching that. You're not ruining my internet history.
If you wanted to have a good Christmas, of course, socially distanced this year.
Drink more water.
Thanks for watching.